This is InterTREKtional, an exploration of Star Trek through an intersectional feminist lens.
Star Trek is both a reflection of our society and an aspiration for our future. The stories it tells shape our world.
Intersectionality explores intersecting forms of oppression and how they affect individuals with compound identities.
Star Trek is for feminists. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Becca.
Hi, InterTrekies.
Hi, InterTrekies. Hi, new listeners. This is very exciting. Hi, Women at Warp. Thanks for having us on.
Yes, and hello, live audience. Oh my God, this is our first ever live podcast. And I have to say I'm a little nervous, but I'm very excited.
But we're gonna be fine. That's great. What is our topic today, Becca?
Oh, wow. Okay, so our topic today is seeking asylum in the Trek universe. So that means that we're looking at times when Star Trek has talked about or had characters who are seeking asylum, who are refugees, and what happened? Like, how did Trek handle that?
Yeah, and we want to find a few terms in the beginning. We started out just looking at asylum seekers, and as we were researching this, we realized that we did want to talk about refugees a little bit too. In my mind, asylum seekers were always people who were sort of being oppressed and were running from someone, like an entity or a person who was trying to hurt them in their home country. And refugees was more broad, like a refugee might be somebody fleeing a hurricane or a natural disaster. But we found that internationally, those terms are defined a little bit differently.
Yeah, there's an organization called the International Rescue Committee that keeps a lot of statistics and like does a lot of reporting on the status of refugees and asylum seekers internationally. And their definition of asylum seekers are people who have left their home and arrived in the country in which they're seeking asylum. So like in this definition, technically, people who are refugees but have not yet arrived at the place where they would like to seek asylum are not yet asylum seekers. And then refugees are really just anybody. So kind of the refugees is the umbrella term, and then asylum seekers is this kind of specific category of people who have already arrived and where they want to have asylum. But I think that colloquially or whatever in our everyday parlance, they're somewhat interchangeable, and I think that we wanted to look at individuals as well as groups of people who have this kind of status, like they are not safe where they are from, and they need to find refuge elsewhere.
Did we want to say at the beginning what kind of inspired us to look at this topic? So we were looking at what's going on in America and what has been going on over the course of the last 4 years, more than that probably, of people trying to enter our country and then being held up at the border camps. Did you want to say more about that?
Yeah. So the really this shift started to happen in 2014 when people at the southern border started to shift from like individuals from Mexico who wanted to emigrate into the United States. Whereas in 2014, due to like political corruption, gang violence, and a couple hurricanes in especially Guatemala and Honduras and one other country I forget the name of, that's in Central America, are like, there's a lot of people there whose lives are at risk because they don't want to participate in gangs. They're like either forcibly recruited or killed, or they've been displaced because of natural disasters. And so this kind of trend of people from that region coming up to the southern border of the United States to seek refuge started in 2014 and has had several kind of waves. I really hesitate to use the term surges, although that's something that the media like uses all the time in this context, because it is very, it's a kind of incendiary language that like dehumanizes people.
Yeah, I agree. And something that I've been thinking about is because I remember protesting shortly after Trump became president, and thinking that this was going to get better, or at least how people were handled once they entered the country and how they were treated would improve under a different president. And I'm not positive that it has.
Yeah. Well, yes, and I think that there are. I'm not like a huge Biden stan, so whatever. I think he's a better president than Trump by leaps and bounds. And part of what is going on right now is that there's. So, let me back up a little bit. It is legal to seek asylum by U.S. law and by international law, and we are in a pandemic. So a lot of like starting in the Trump administration, and this has been extended into the Biden administration, people who arrive at the southern border seeking asylum right now are being put into kind of holding camps and not being like not able to engage in the asylum seeking process because of the pandemic. There's like a special legal status in the United States that says, like, in the case of a particular type of disaster of this kind, we can shut down our border more so than we already do.
Yeah. And Kamala Harris specifically asked people not to come.
Yeah, that's really the thing that kicked off this episode is like her speech. She went to Guatemala. She gave a speech which was broadcast on their like public radio. And in it, she said, "Do not come."
So,
okay. F you, like.
So in light of all of that, going through the episodes that we watched, do we want to say which ones we watched first, or do we just want to like get into it?
Yeah, I think let's just like do briefly like which episodes we watched.
So we watched Sanctuary on Deep Space Nine. Sorry, I'm like,
you're ready.
I haven't done live before, so I'm just like talking fast. Yeah.
Do it.
We watched Sanctuary on Deep Space Nine. We watched The Brightest Star from Short Treks, which is the one where we see how Saru joins Starfleet. We watched The Masterpiece Society from The Next Generation. And we watched Cogenitor from Enterprise. Oh, and we watched Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night from Deep Space Nine.
Yeah. It's like one of the most emo episode titles that I've encountered. Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night. I'm just like,
absolutely.
And it's kind of an emo episode. So we watched a bunch of episodes because we were trying to get a sense of like what's kind of like over the course of Star Trek's run, like how have asylum seekers been treated? And I think like we can do kind of like broad themes and then go into individual episodes. Does that make sense to you?
Sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Do we want to note the ones that we decided to cut out?
Oh, sure.
So we also watched Generations, which said that it has Generations the movie, which is not my favorite Star Trek movie. But
I remember really, really liking
really.
it, and then in this rewatch being like, wait, that was boring and not much happened.
And very, very Christmas. Yeah. But it has refugees in it, but for like 2 seconds, and it is not really a major plot point. It's not really pertinent. They're just sort of used as, I think you were saying when we were prepping, that they're used as props.
Yeah, they're like so there's 2 refugee ships that are like in distress, and the brand new Enterprise, I think it's Enterprise B, is like in close range to them. They're the closest ship, so they have to go like give them aid, and it's made more urgent that this aid be provided because they are refugees. And that's like the only mention of refugees, and then their ships get destroyed by the Nexus and we never hear about them again. So
right. Yeah, and then we also thought about talking about the Romulan refugees in Picard.
Yeah,
but again, the show doesn't really explore their position as refugees. So, but if you want to watch another episode, you can go check that one out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You kind of get a sense of malaise in the refugee camps, but the episode itself really isn't about them. And except for Picard kind of stirring up shirt for no reason.
Yeah. So you said you wanted to talk about broader themes. I mean, how do you feel about it? Like, I don't really feel like Starfleet has a very consistent position.
Yeah. I mean, I think based on this collection of episodes that we watched, it seems like Starfleet's position is to grant asylum to people who request it unless they feel like they don't want to.
Yeah.
And it's kind of random. It feels very random.
Yeah. And I think we can revisit this, toward the end of the episode, but like my theory is that they do it when it's convenient and when there's any reason why it's politically is not the word I'm looking for. I was going to say politically inconvenient, but I think what I mean is diplomatically inconvenient.
Yeah.
Then they're willing to deny it.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about Sanctuary?
Yeah. All right. So Sanctuary, Deep Space Nine episode is there's these aliens called the Skreans that have come through the wormhole looking for their new homeland, which has been prophesied. And they're fleeing some sort of persecution, I believe, on their home planet. So,
sorry for interrupting. Yeah, it's a little, I'm not exactly sure what their situation is because they both say that they're farmers, which makes me think that like they live somewhere if they've been farming, but also that they've been oppressed and enslaved.
Okay.
So I don't know. Maybe they're just not running their own farms. I'm not sure. We don't really get a lot of details, but yes, continue.
The backstory part of their situation has left my mind, so I believe you.
Oh, okay.
But they ultimately decide that Bajor is their prophesied homeland. And then a lot of the episode is them like trying to convince the Bajorans to let them settle in this kind of unpopulated area on Bajor that they see as like possible fertile farmland. But the Bajorans are on the other hand are like, yo, we can't have 3 million people just come and like settle on our planet right now. We already have a famine. We're still recovering from 50 years of Cardassian occupation. Like, we can barely take care of ourselves. We will not be able to take care of you. And we don't want you to like come here and then just die.
Yeah. And something I've been thinking about is like Bajor, I think, is not yet part of the Federation. They've either applied for Federation membership or they're like going to apply for Federation membership. I think there's a continuum of like where they are on that path throughout the series. And I'm not exactly sure where they are in season 2, but they are like not Federation members yet. But they they pretend like they're considering it. Like they get a committee together, they talk it over, and then they're like, no, obviously 3 million people cannot come here. We just got rid of the Cardassians. And the show really, really wants you to side with Bajor. Like I remember the first time I watched it being like, these people are ridiculous. Of course they can't stay there. And,
well, yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I left out, I think that's an important point here, is that Captain Sisko and like rest of the Starfleet officers have already found the Skreans, an M-class planet that is uninhabited, that they could go to that's nearby.
Right.
So
Yeah. Like the
there's an
Starfleet
alternative.
people were on it. Like they were immediately like, okay, there's this many of you. We need to find a place for you to live. Look, we found one conveniently, an uninhabited planet, or at least an uninhabited. I think they say an uninhabited planet.
Yeah, an uninhabited M-class planet. And like when we were prepping for this, we were like, how likely is it that there's actually just like all these M-class planets that are totally available? But whatever.
There's so many like just M-class planets just like lying around for people
whenever
to
it's
inhabit.
convenient. They're like, oh, we need to land now. Oh, there's an M-class planet nearby. Anyway, but the fact of that alternative just changes the stakes of this conversation entirely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say the show really sets you up in the beginning to like. There's like 10 minutes of Kira walking around. Sorry, my dog. There's like 10 minutes of like Kira walking around, like dealing with all of the different problems that their society is going through before we even meet these aliens. So you're really like, oh yeah, no, they can't handle other people. Mm-hmm. And then we have the M-class planet.
Yeah. But I think without the M-class planet, it's a different conversation and more, I think, closer to what happens on this planet Earth, where there really isn't uninhabited areas. Like,
no, there aren't alternatives.
Exactly. There's never like somewhere else that people can go. Like, you have to acknowledge that, like, when you're migrating, somebody's home is where you're migrating to. And yet, like, something that you said in the prep, like, when you side with Bajor in this, you feel like a Republican.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm like, oh yeah, we can't take care of these screens. Like, we have to take care of Bajor first, which, you know, in contemporary American politics, at least, like, the people who are saying that aren't always the people who are actually investing money in domestic projects, right? They're the same people going like, oh, we're spending too much on welfare. We shouldn't be spending money on the people here either.
Yeah.
But yeah, it made me feel like a Republican. I was like, oh, wow. Watching it this time, sort of looking out for those issues as opposed to, you know, the first time I ever watched this episode and I wasn't really thinking critically. I noticed that, like, oh, it sort of set me up to feel like a conservative and be like, we don't have enough resources for these people. They do argue to the Bajorans that they're going to take care of themselves. But I mean, I think I agree with the Bajorans that that's not really realistic.
I think it would be challenging for them to handle themselves, to like do the thing that they say they're going to do, farm and like make it like fertile and blah blah blah, self-sustaining. And I think like it's hard to speculate about whether that particular like situation would play out that way or not. But what I do want to say is that, like, as we reflect on how this plays out in actual reality, like, immigrants coming to a country, for example, like the United States, actually are an economic boon. And the fiction that, like, immigrants are stealing our jobs is very pernicious and not borne out by facts. Like, it's just not how that works. And I think this leads a little bit into the brightest star in Saru's story. Where the thing that I pulled out from that is that Saru becoming a member of Starfleet is like the seed that ends up with all of Kaminar and the Kelpians becoming an integral member of the Federation 1,000 years later.
Yeah.
And I think it's really cool. And I think it's like, okay, we can see this and look at this and say, like, immigrants are good for the place that they immigrate to.
Right. Also, Saru is like a genius, and like he becomes like he's a temporary captain, like he's a first officer. Like, Starfleet gains so much from him. He speaks like 9 different languages. Like the Federation.
It's 90.
Really?
It's
a lot.
It's a lot.
I just remember that it's a lot. Like, when the when the magic language box goes down, he's the only one who can understand all the other people on the ship.
Mm-hmm.
The universal translator, the magic language box.
The magic language box.
Oh, can I say one more thing about Sanctuary before we really dive into the brightest star?
Totally.
So the other thing that's sort of complicating, the writers in the writers' room, I think, for Deep Space Nine are just like obsessed with Israel. I'm pretty sure, because there are many times throughout the series where it seems like the Bajorans are Israelis, and other times where it seems like the Bajorans are Palestinians, and a lot of people reflect on this. And in this episode, it seems like the Skreans maybe are Jews, because they are looking at their holy text, which tells them that Bajor is supposed to be the place that they're going to. And so, the evidence is like pretty clear. Like, you go through the wormhole, the planet on the other side of the wormhole is the place they're supposed to go to, which is why they want to reject the other M-class planet. And they're farmers, and they want to settle in a desert, and they want to turn it into a lush area. So they're going to make the desert bloom. So they're just like these very clear kind of like themes there for people who are willing to look for them. And in this instance, they didn't get to settle there. So I just think it's just like one more time that the writers of Deep Space Nine are looking at the idea of Jewish refugees just from like a different end. And this time it's not the Bajorans. This time it's the people coming to Bajor.
Yeah, absolutely. I really do see that parallel. And I think like we've on our podcast before, we've talked a bit about, I think we have an episode called Space Jews, where we talk about how the Bajorans may be Jews. And I think someday it would be interesting to talk more in depth about Israel-Palestine. But for the sake of time, I think we can put a pin in that one. But I do think, I think that is a good observation for sure.
So can I read your summary for the brightest star?
Yes.
Okay, so I know we've begun to touch on it. Saru sends a signal to the universe, and Giorgio answers. She grants him sanctuary in the Federation in exchange for never going home again. Sad. And so this is a short trek, so this is basically just Saru from Discovery, his origin story. And I mean, just other things to note, like the Kelpians are an oppressed people on their planet. They are routinely killed, I think, and eaten.
It does seem like they're eaten. I feel like that's not explicitly said, but yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And Saru is facing the possibility. I mean, every time one of these cycles happens, he faces the possibility that he might be one of the ones to die. So he's definitely seeking asylum sort of under the, even though he's not in the Federation yet, and asking for asylum in like my colloquial understanding of it, like he is an oppressed person, like fleeing other people.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I got distracted because I remembered that we have a comment section. I went over to look at the comment section.
Are people talking to us?
Yeah.
Oh, hi, people.
People said
Sorry,
that
I'm looking at our own notes because I'm like,
no, you wanted to stay on track. I'm the one.
Yeah.
I had that little ADD moment there. That
I love it. Well, let me know if you see a good question. I'm going to say some of the things that I feel like you were saying when we were prepping, which was that the thing that you really stuck out to you about this episode is that seeking asylum means giving up your home. And I think that's a theme we see come up in other episodes. It's possibly the only theme about asylum seekers or refugees that's relevant from Generations, which we're not really going to get into, but like if there's anything going on, it was this homesickness that those people experienced. And you already made your point about him being an example of why asylum seekers are good for society. So yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but I think that like to expand a little bit on that, like giving up home, it's reflected in the other episodes that we saw, but like there's this tension, right, where you like people who are seeking asylum or who are refugees are leaving their home because their home has become unlivable, dangerous, or something. And Saru's home is in this kind of like, it's very dangerous, but every Kelpian is killed and possibly eaten at some point in their life. And yet, like, because it's kind of built in culturally and religiously, they don't feel like they're under threat necessarily. But Saru doesn't want to do that. He's like, I would rather opt out of this. I know I'm smart. I can like monkey with technology from the Baul. And side note, it is a very suspension of disbelief moment to believe that he could send a signal out to Starfleet that the Baul would not also get.
Yeah.
Which he is sending from their own piece of technology. Whatever. It's okay.
My fan wanking is that they weren't looking for it. They're just like, those guys don't know what they're doing. We're never observing. I don't know. That's what I decided. But I think you're right. It's very suspect.
But we don't really, well, the thing that we don't really get from this episode or from the other time that it's mentioned that Saru was like granted asylum, which is in the episode called The Sound of Thunder, I believe, is the actual process of him requesting asylum and then being granted it. We just know that it happened. And so, yeah, I think it's conditional on this, like, you're never going to go home again. And I don't know how true that is for people who are granted asylum in the United States, that they can never go home again. I mean, like they don't really want to because it's dangerous for them to do that.
Right.
But for people who are immigrants or people who are seeking permanent residency in the United States, it is very hard for them to go home again. Like they can, but it often jeopardizes their immigration status.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm in fact, like there are a lot of famous cases, like when I was in law school, that I sort of like vaguely remember of people who were legal permanent residents, but had not been given citizenship, who would go home to visit and then never be let back in.
Yeah.
It can definitely jeopardize that process, or like the laws were changed in the meantime. So like maybe they were citizens and then like the country gets racist and starts to be suspicious of a certain group. And like, why did you go back to Russia? Or like, why did you go back to China? We don't want your people here anymore. And then you can't get back in. So it can be risky. And historically it has been risky to return.
Yeah.
So Masterpiece Society.
Oh yeah. So on the subject of people,
I'm like, we gotta go. We gotta
get moving. Right. Usually when we're recording, we're a little bit more lackadaisical with the time. Anyway, so connecting this to Masterpiece Society, which is this TNG episode that we watched, like ultimately people do leave their home and like kind of also never to return. But backing up a little bit, in this episode, there's like this group of human beings who left Earth to found their own society where they could genetically engineer themselves to be like perfect. And they live in a bubble on this planet that is under threat, like by a loose stellar core fragment. Like it's just like Star was like,
sorry, I just realized because they're a genetically engineered society that doesn't have contact with others, and they literally live in a bubble. So I just realized like they literally live in a bubble, but they also figuratively live in a bubble.
They're very.
It's kind of. I'm sorry for interrupting you. That's why I was laughing. So they're all gonna die.
Yeah, they're all gonna die because like earthquakes are gonna destroy their situation. And the Enterprise is like, they've been tracking this loose stellar core fragment, and then they realize that this society is here, and they go there and they're like, yo, earthquakes are gonna come destroy your situation. We'll evacuate you. And are somewhat surprised to be like people being like, no, thanks. We'll stay. And
they do not want to be evacuated. So they have to come up with a solution which ends up with the scientist Hannah
Mm-hmm.
working with Geordie in order to come up with a solution, which they do using technology from his visor. And then, sorry, did you want to continue? I just
Oh no, do it.
yeah. And then Hannah, scientist Hannah Bates realizes that science is like way more advanced off of her planet, and she wants to leave with the Enterprise. So she asks for asylum. And this causes a huge issue because not only are they all genetically engineered to just be great at their jobs, they're also sort of genetically engineered to like perfectly fit together as a society. Like the society is this really fragile puzzle, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I was kind of imagining it like a Jenga tower, and if like we take out one person, the whole thing's gonna fall apart. So
That
they
is
really don't. They really don't want her to leave.
They don't want they do not want anybody to leave. And I think there's something to be investigated about the concept that you could have a perfected society where every single person only has their one specific role, and there's no redundancy, and there's no like shift, like mid-career job change or whatever, which I think is totally bogus. But if we assume that this is how this works, then yeah, it will be really impactful, negatively impactful to the society when the people who want to leave choose to leave. And it's not just Hannah Bates, it's like a number of other people too.
For some reason, yeah, in order to implement like whatever changes they need to protect the bubble, they send down a bunch of engineers from the Enterprise to work with engineers from Bubble Society, and all the engineers from Bubble Society like decide to leave. I think it's not all of them, but it's a lot. It's a lot of them.
Yeah, it's enough that even if we do like recognize a society where there's redundancy, that they're probably losing some folks. And some capacity, some actual capacity. And so, like, despite these individuals seeking asylum, there is some debate in the Enterprise crew that they are whether or not they're going to let them, because the people in charge, the president / tour guide that Deanna Troi falls in love with, and like his friend or person that he works with, who I named Dogma Defender.
He's
They're like, no.
Troy for some reason like hooks up with this president Aaron Carter, who I agree, he's also kind of the tour guide. Not Aaron Carter. Aaron Connor. And
not a Backstreet Boy, too bad.
Yeah, and I guess like because they have this moment, they like fall in love, and so then she feels so guilty over exposing him to, I don't know, herself, that she then kind of takes his side in the war room. She's like, yeah, no, like, do we really want to disrupt the society? There's like a lot of people, I think, in Picard's little inner circle who give a lot of weight to maybe not granting these people asylum, which I think is ridiculous, that they give, that they're not just like, oh, these people want asylum, we have to take them, even though it's going to suck for this little colony.
Yeah. Something that I noticed in that debate is that Worf is like the first person who's immediately like, yes, give them asylum.
Yeah.
So and they ultimately do get asylum. So finally Worf like wins the argument.
I know. It's like there's like this ongoing trend of like Worf always being shut down, or like Worf always taking the wrong position, and Picard always saying no to him, and like finally he gets to be right in one episode.
Wait, maybe that's why they debate it more than we think that they should have, is because he's the one who's in favor of it.
Right. They're like, Worf thinks this is a good idea, it's got to be wrong.
Oh no. Yeah. Okay. So what else? Oh, we did have an intertrection from this episode, not related to asylum seeking, but somewhat of an ableism issue, where they meet Geordie and he's blind, right? And he's got his visor, and they're like, oh, nobody in our society is blind. We have genetically altered people to not have that happen to them. And it's just like, bleh.
So they never would, it would be like if nobody has vision problems, you never would have invented glasses, right? So they never invent the visor, and the visor technology ends up being integral to the solution somehow of saving them from the fragment that's going to destroy their colony.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh, I wrote in my notes that the conclusion of this episode is that new ideas are as dangerous as seismic destruction.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, so the new ideas are dangerous to the society. I get, but like, I don't know why any weight is given to this, because like their society founded on eugenics, and
but like good eugenics, yay! No,
and it's just like I just don't have any empathy for these people watching this episode, so it's like really hard for me to understand why why the core crew of the Enterprise is like really feeling for like the impact that this is going to have on their society. It's like, I don't know, maybe figure it out, maybe train other people to do these jobs, maybe like just
ask around, like, hey, are you tired of being a mediocre pianist? Like, maybe you want to be a really excellent engineer. you could do that. I say that because in the middle of this episode there's like a 16-year-old playing the piano, and like everybody's like raptly paying attention, and I'm like, this is not even very good piano.
No, it's not good.
Why? Just seems like their lives are a little boring.
Yeah. There was a funny meme about that on STSP, where they were like, we're a perfect society, and Troy's like, what do you do for fun? And they were like, piano recitals, and she's like, no, you're wrong, you're not a perfect society.
She seemed to be into it, but maybe she was just like, oh, I have a crush, so I'm gonna like do the things that he likes to do.
So okay, so just keeping track so far, 3 million people, refugees trying to go to Bajor, not granted asylum. One person who's super smart granted asylum.
Saru.
Like 30 people, a handful of people from this eugenics society who we don't really know where they end up, but want to leave the eugenics society. Nothing's really on the line politically. It's not a big burden. Granted asylum.
Yeah, there's no like risk of this society like leaving the Federation. They're a small colony of humans, and I think we were thinking about this in like terms of the Prime Directive, like how come the Enterprise is okay just like beaming down, being like, hey, y'all are gonna die, and remembering that they're not actually aliens, they're humans. So it doesn't matter in that case,
even though they're technologically less advanced. It's like the Prime Directive doesn't apply here, although they seem to be thinking about it a lot, right? They're like, what kind of impact are we having by having sex with these people? Sorry. I mean, right? Like that's what
a true violation of the
really
Prime Directive.
With. Yes,
boning the people you should not be boning. Was he even cute?
They never are.
You pointed out that, okay, so this is a bit of a side note, but I'm going to be very brief, that like I ship Troy and Riker hard for my whole life. And I believe that they are like kind of the perfect example of a non-monogamous couple who's cool with each like dating other people. And in this, Riker's like, I don't know, he's like keeping an eye on Troy, like, oh, I see that you are attracted to president/tour guide guy. Like, hey.
So what it was, so you know, like the canon is that they are exes and that they've broken up, and like because they end up married later, and because of the way they interact on the show, like your headcanon is that they're actually together in an open relationship of some sort,
right?
Or that they're still involved somehow, but they're not exclusive or something. And
they're in love, whether they're actively like in a romantic relationship or not. whatever.
But what made me think about it is that the president tour guide doesn't say goodbye to her or like break up with her. He gives the message to Riker to relay to her. He's like, let her know, like, because he's not going to see her again. And he's like, just like let her know that, I'm gonna miss her or whatever, but apologize that I couldn't say goodbye. And Riker's like, oh yeah, I'll pass that along. And I'm just like, does he know that he's talking to his metamor? Like,
has he sussed this out somehow?
it was
I don't
just,
know.
it was just really like, oh, I think that was like one in favor of your theory that he knew that Riker was the guy to give that message to.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. And I want to bring it back. There's a good question that we had in the comments, actually. Overall, how would you characterize or rate Federation's approach to asylum seekers, understanding there aren't tons of detailed examples? And I can answer that, which I think generally they are inclined to grant, or at least they are inclined to grant asylum. And they are it seems to be mandated that they at least hear out the request for asylum. So basically giving people due process. So I think where I land on this is that generally the Federation is pro giving people asylum, except for sometimes. And yeah, like you said in your question, there isn't a ton of really clear examples, but I think that they're more inclined to do kind of one-off, like a single individual being like, hey, than they are for groups. They kind of want to find a different solution for groups.
Right, because what happened with the Romulans? They didn't Picard had to go to bat for them, and they didn't end up helping them.
Yeah. But let's talk about cogenitor, because I think that this cogenitor is an example where somebody asked for asylum and was not granted asylum.
Yeah. And we need to give a content warning for this. So there is mention of suicide for one character.
Yeah, and this if you're
if you're listening to this later, skip ahead if you don't want to. We're going to get into darker topics, I guess, from here on out.
True. Yes. So cogenitor is an Enterprise episode, which means that maybe fewer people who are Trekkies have seen it, because this is not the most popular series. And yet, I think that this episode in particular is one of the more focused on Enterprise. Notorious is good, because it deals with gender and reproduction. And I can do a quick summary, which is that the Enterprise goes to check out a nifty star, and they encounter this sophisticated friendly alien species who are more technologically advanced than the humans at this point. And they have three genders. They have male and female, and they have a third gender that they call the cogenitors, that are approximately 3% of their population. So there's not very many of them. And
I was just going to say, I think it's also accurate to say that they have three sexes.
Sexes.
That
Yes.
That I think in this case they have three sexes, and they have what they call genders in the episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
good continue.
Sex and gender are somewhat synonymous, but they're not exactly synonymous. So you're right. Yeah, three sexes I think is more accurate than three genders, and they call them genders. So the cogenitors are required for reproduction. You cannot have a baby if you're a Vizian without the participation of a cogenitor. And that what comes to light is that the way that the cogenitors are treated in this society is basically they're kind of kept pets if you want to be nice about it. They're kind of slaves if you want to be less nice about it. They're barred from learning how to read. They're not allowed to really have hobbies or interests or friends. It seems like they're really just, they're like assigned by the government to people who qualify to have a kid, and then they stick around with that couple until the kid is had, and then go on to the next couple, apparently.
Yeah, it's really like Star Trek meets The Handmaid's Tale. And
Yes.
I feel like everyone's familiar with The Handmaid's Tale, but if you aren't, it's a society where there are a very small amount of fertile women who are assigned by the government to couples to help them conceive a child. So it's kind of like taking that idea and being like, what if that idea were biological? Okay, let's write an episode about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
It,
so Trip encounters, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna yeah, let's finish the plot summary before I sort of go off on a little tangent.
Cool.
So Trip makes friends. Trip makes friends with them, with the cogenitor.
Exactly. And teaches them how to read. Oh, little note on pronouns here. We're using they, them for the cogenitor. In the episode, they mostly refer to the cogenitor as it, which seemed very uncomfortable for us. And Trip refers to them as her for the whole episode. He's just like, she feels like a she to me. Okay. Anyway, so he teaches them how to read and befriends them, and like puts on his white savior pants and is like, I don't like this. And the cogenitor like becomes like really like, she's like, oh, Trip, you're really cool. I like you a lot. I want your name. And he's like, actually, my name is Charles. So they adopt the name Charles. And then Charles like wants to requests asylum on the Enterprise because they want to continue learning how to read and like being a whole person. The aliens get mad and they're like, we do not, like, we need this person, otherwise there's a baby that's not going to get born. And Archer,
Archer comes back from his little star trip with his friend and is like very, very angry. He's like, why did you give this person this idea? You're messing up like this great relationship that we were going to develop with this more advanced people who are going to give us technology. Like, you've caused like a whole incident, like you've messed up first contact. He does not grant asylum. And then Charles returns to the Vizian ship, and Charles commits suicide. And when Archer learns of that, Archer brings that, this is like more that we wrote down in it, but Archer brings that back to Trip's attention and is like, this is your fault. It is your fault this person is dead. It is your fault this baby wasn't born. Which is like
rough.
Super messed up.
Yes. Yeah. But I think, so that is messed up, and there's a lot that we could say about gender stuff and reproductive coercion, and we will kind of talk about those topics a little bit later. But in this, like, looking at it from this request for asylum was not granted, like, why was it not granted? And I think that where I land is that the reason is that the Vizians are more technologically advanced and would, like, the Enterprise would not win in a fight with them. And they do kind of imply that they will fight for this cogenitor.
Interesting, because like if you watch all of the Enterprise, Archer does a lot of like cowboy diplomacy. He's like a little bit like Kirk that way. And there are other situations where he would have gone to bat, or he would have tried to fight, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole season where he takes on this hugely technologically advanced empire as one ship to save the whole planet Earth. Like, sorry, like,
yeah.
There are other times where he's willing to fight against all odds, and he is not willing to do that for this person. Like, and we're looking at a ship where they don't really have a concept of the Prime Directive yet, and there's not really a Federation yet, and it's just Archer as an Earth ship, and he's like one man deciding whether or not to grant asylum or not, and he decides no, because like I don't know, they want to have good contact with these guys.
He wants to keep being friends with the guy he made friends with on the Star trip, and it's like a little bit of a lame reason to not give somebody asylum. But
Can
I
I just
also
note,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I just wanted to note like some interjections like really quickly about this episode. Like just one, I think the way that the cogenitors are portrayed in terms of like our understanding of non-binary people and trans people now is just like not accurate. And I know that Women at Warp does like a really great episode about that. If you want to check out their backlog and learn more about that. The other thing I want to say is that I think the way that they're portrayed is very similar to women historically. Like they can't own property, they're treated like pets, they're necessary for reproduction, they're not allowed to learn to read. And I think given all of those sort of data points, the episode was more trying to like draw a line to how women were treated in other societies and used this idea of a third gender to get at that. So it's like they're using these trans issues to talk about women kind of. And I just wanted to note that stuff before we move on.
Yeah, well, I think that actually points to something that I wanted to say, which is that there's another point in Star Trek there's that TNG Enterprise that has the neutral gender species. So, I'm blanking on the name. But there's a point where Riker's like, oh, we could give you asylum. Soren is the name of the person who is like of this agender species, but like identifies as the outcast, identifies as female. And that's another time when like no asylum is given. I think she doesn't want it. But it just feels like when we get into a zone of ambiguous gender, like asylum is less likely to happen than if you have an identifiable either male or female gender.
Yeah, that like our main characters are also sort of seeing them as less than people and not giving them human rights.
Yeah.
Oh
man, I just like this comment. It would be terrible policy in our world today if we denied asylum to an individual from an oppressed gender sexual minority group because it might lead to social reform in their country. Yes, that is not a good reason to deny somebody asylum.
Yeah. So yeah, and I mean again, like similar to some of the other episodes we talked about, like why are we considering like how this is going to impact the society where people are being oppressed? Like the reason they're seeking asylum is because these societies are messed up and they're oppressing people. Like we shouldn't worry about like if helping this one person is going to mess up their terrible society. Like that would be a good thing.
Yeah. And them staying alive to like speak from a distance is better than being dead in the place where they are, which is like kind of the actual risk.
So we're running low on time, but we wanted to talk quickly about Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night, which is Deep Space Nine, season 6, episode 17, and is looking at sort of Bajoran ghettos, what they call refugee camps, but they're really not refugees. It's more akin to concentration camps. Can we say that as Jewish women? I think
so. Okay. Also note here, content warning. We're going to talk about some like sexual reproductive harm. So if you're not comfortable with that, just like the rest of this 6 minutes that we've got left, sign off. But yeah,
but yeah, we wanted to talk about this episode really quickly. It's a little bit different because she's not seeking asylum, but like they are refugees and they are held called refugees and they're held in camps the way we have people right now being held in camps at our southern borders where there are reproductive harm. And I wanted to like I can just do a super fast summary. Basically, Kira uses some science Bajoran magic to go back in time and finds out that her mother was taken from this camp where her family lived as Gul Dukat's lover, and didn't actually die, but like lived with Gul Dukat as a comfort woman. a lot of stuff happens from there. Go watch the episode. It's great. But like, that's really all you need to know for the rest of our discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we feel like we're justified in talking about this episode because they call them refugees, but they're not. They're actually under Cardassian like occupation.
Right. Yeah. But what did you want to? Sorry, I'm just like, oh my gosh, we have so little time.
Oh yeah. Okay.
What did you want to say about the reproductive harm in the camps?
Yeah. So thank you. In this episode, the harm is that these women are like just kind of identified and pulled out from their situation and made to comfort the Cardassian officers. Puke. And like maybe a little bit hacky of a segue, but I wanted to talk about things that are happening at the southern border, not so much as like people being coerced into like having sex under coercion, which I think does likely happen, but I couldn't find a lot of evidence for that. There is like, anyway, but there's solid evidence for people being forced to have hysterectomies when they don't consent to doing that. And like, it's horrible. Forced sterilization is something that the United States has a terrible history of doing to Black and Brown and Indigenous people. And we're just continuing in that mode today with people's uteruses being removed without their knowledge or consent. And
disabled people.
It makes me so fucking angry.
Yeah. So. I mean, I've been thinking about that a lot lately with Britney Spears and the fact that she can't remove her IUD. And you know, she's just one woman and she's a very wealthy woman, but like what's going on with her is not new for people who are in her position.
Yeah. And in some sense, she's requesting asylum from her situation. She's like, get me out of this. She does not have autonomy or control. And neither.
I know, I keep hoping that someone will like spirit her away to Canada and like rescue her or something.
It's like an Italian Job kind of heist. Like, we're getting Britney out. But yeah.
We have like 2 minutes left. Do we have any final thoughts? Do we have any questions we want to answer?
Yes. So call to action. Everybody who's watching this, if you want to take an action and do something about the current situation in the United States with immigration, refugees, and asylum seekers, this organization, Never Again Action, is a favorite of mine. They organize direct action at ICE facilities and to like interfere in deportation activities. And there's a link there. I think it's going to go up in the comments to click if you want to donate to them. They are a Jewish-led organization, and something that, if you're a new viewer for us, Ryan and I are both Jewish. So we come at our intersectionality from a Jewish angle. And so, yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you for sharing that resource. Yeah, and thank you for you did a lot of the research on what's currently going on with refugees right now, and I just like want to thank you for doing that. And I want to thank Women at Warp for having us on, and I hope that people kind of check out our backlog. We just released an episode recently talking about like pregnancy in Star Trek, so that's kind of cool. And I think probably next month we're going to talk about like queer villainy and the mirror universe. So that's coming down the pike.
And kink.
Oh yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you everybody for watching us today, and like and subscribe and live long and prosper.
Peace and long life.